Close your eyes for a moment, or maybe they're already closed, and you're listening to this in the dark, somewhere soft and quiet, while the rest of the world slowly settles down for the night. Imagine you are lying in a meadow at the edge of a vast, ancient forest. Above you, the sky is a deep indigo, not fully dark, not quite blue, the color the world turns just before the stars fully appear. The air is cool and clean. Somewhere nearby, a small stream moves slowly over smooth stones. You can hear it, that gentle, patient sound of water finding its way. Crickets have begun their evening chorus, soft and rhythmic, filling the quiet spaces between your thoughts. An owl calls once from somewhere deep in the trees. Then the forest becomes still again. Your body is comfortable here. Your breathing slows. Your muscles begin to soften one by one, releasing the day. And yet, something interesting sometimes happens in moments like this. Even when everything is quiet, even when nothing is wrong, even when your body is safe and resting, a small part of you stays alert. A subtle hum beneath the calm, a quiet sense that something might require your attention, even though there is nothing there. If you know that feeling, you are not strange. In fact, you are experiencing something that modern neuroscience understands remarkably well. Tonight, we're going to explore the science behind a very common experience. Why the human nervous system can sometimes feel unsafe, even when everything around you is completely safe. Let's begin with something honest. Most of us have had moments, many moments, maybe most nights, where we lie down and instead of drifting gently into rest, we find that our body has other ideas. The thoughts begin to move a little faster than the day would suggest they should. The chest feels slightly tighter than it has any obvious reason to be. There is a vague, unnameable restlessness behind the ribs, or somewhere in the stomach, or at the back of the throat. Not pain exactly, not fear exactly, just a kind of low, persistent hum of alertness, as though your body hasn't quite received the message that the day is over and that the world, at least for now, is safe. And this can be deeply confusing and even a little bit lonely because you know on the surface of things that you are fine. You are in your home or a familiar room or some other place of safety. The doors are locked. The people you love are nearby or at least accounted for. There is no emergency, no tiger, no imminent disaster requiring your attention. Your rational mind can scan the environment and report back clearly. Everything is okay. Nothing to worry about. And yet the body persists in its quiet agitation. The nervous system keeps scanning. The heart beats just slightly too quickly for genuine rest. The mind circles, rehearsing old conversations, anticipating future problems, reviewing the day's events one more time as though something important might still need to be processed. Why does this happen? Why do so many people carry that undercurrent of alertness even in the safest and most comfortable circumstances? Why can't the body simply believe the evidence? Why can't it read the environmental report, see the locked doors, feel the soft pillow, register the absence of any actual threat, and simply let go? Tonight, over the next few hours, we are going to explore exactly that question. And I want to tell you, before we go any further, that there is nothing broken about you if you recognize yourself in this description. Not even a little bit. In fact, as we are going to discover together, the nervous system that does this is not a malfunctioning one. It is a nervous system that is doing precisely what it was designed to do. protecting you, watching over you with an intelligence so old and so deep that it predates language, predates memory, predates everything you consciously know about yourself or the world. Understanding this, genuinely understanding it, at the level of neurons and hormones and ancient evolutionary biology, can be one of the most releasing things you ever do. Because when you understand why your body feels the way it does, you stop fighting it. And when you stop fighting it, something remarkable begins to happen. The body begins to feel heard. The nervous system, finding itself met with understanding rather than frustration, begins to settle. Not immediately and not completely, but in the small, incremental way that all real change occurs. Gradually, quietly, like the sky lightning before dawn. So let us begin. Let us take this slow together. There are some things worth knowing before we go in. First, everything we explore tonight is grounded in peer-reviewed science. In the work of neuroscientists like Stephen Porges at Indiana University's Kinsey Institute, who spent decades developing polyvagal theory. In the research of neuroscientist Bruce McEwen at Rockefeller University, who illuminated the concept of allostatic load and the brain's relationship with stress. In the work of psychiatrist and researcher Bessel van der Kolk, whose decades studying PTSD and the body's response to overwhelming stress produced some of the most important and most humanizing insights in modern medicine. In the neuroscience of the amygdala and the HPA axis developed at Harvard and the NIH and in laboratories around the world. All of it, the science, pointing in the same direction, toward a deeply kind and deeply clarifying understanding of what is happening when the body stays alert in a safe world. Second, nothing in what we discuss tonight is intended to diagnose, treat, or replace professional care. If what we explore resonates deeply and you feel that your own nervous system dysregulation significantly affects your quality of life, please do seek out someone trained in trauma-informed or somatic approaches to therapy. There is real help available, and understanding the science is only the beginning. Third, and most importantly, listen at whatever level you are able to. If you fall asleep somewhere in the middle of this, that is not just fine. That is the point. The voice will keep going. The science will keep unfolding quietly in the background. And your nervous system, in its extraordinary and ancient intelligence, will continue to receive whatever it needs, whether your conscious mind is there to register it or not. To understand why you can feel unsafe in a safe environment, we need to start at the very beginning. Not the beginning of your life, but something much further back than that. We need to start at the beginning of your nervous system story, which is a story hundreds of millions of years in the making. Your brain, right now as you listen to these words, is not a single unified structure. It is a layered architecture built over immense stretches of evolutionary time, with older regions sitting beneath newer ones, the way geological layers stack one upon another beneath the Earth's surface. Each layer still fully present, each layer still fully active, each layer still performing the work it evolved to perform. And the most ancient of those layers, the regions sitting deepest in the brain, closest to the brainstem, these are the regions that handle survival. They are not sophisticated, at least not in the way we usually use that word. They do not weigh evidence, consider multiple interpretations, or consult logic before acting. They are fast, automatic, extraordinarily efficient, and they operate on a single overriding priority, the same priority they have always operated on: keep you alive. At the center of this ancient survival machinery is a small, almond-shaped cluster of neurons sitting deep within the temporal lobe of your brain. You have two of them, one nested in each hemisphere, and they are called the amygdalae. The amygdala is often described in popular writing about neuroscience as the brain's fear center or alarm system, and while that description is something of a simplification, the amygdala is involved in a much broader range of emotional and motivational processes than just fear. It captures something true and important about the role these structures play in the experience of threat and the body's response to it. When your senses encounter something in the environment, a sound, a movement, a smell, a change in the quality of the light, the signals from your sensory organs travel along two separate pathways toward the brain. One pathway is the long route, sometimes called the high road. It travels through the sensory cortex, where information is processed carefully, thoroughly, and in full context. It is on the high road that the thinking brain weighs in, that memory and experience and rational assessment are brought to bear, that the system arrives at considered interpretations. That loud noise was a car backfiring outside. No problem. The high road is accurate, but it takes time. The second pathway is the short route, sometimes called the low road, and it bypasses the thinking brain entirely. It goes straight to the amygdala, carrying a rough, imprecise, but extremely fast signal about the potential emotional significance of what the senses have detected. This route delivers what the neuroscientist Joseph Ledoux, in his decades of work on fear and the amygdala, described as a kind of quick and dirty threat assessment. Not a fully processed interpretation, but a rapid, blurry preview. And the amygdala, receiving this preview, makes an immediate binary decision. Safe or potentially not safe. If the amygdala decides potentially not safe, it fires. Instantly and automatically, it sends a distress signal to the hypothalamus. A small but extraordinarily powerful region near the base of the brain that serves as the command center for the body's internal environment, regulating everything from temperature to hunger to the stress response. The hypothalamus does not pause for deliberation. It activates the sympathetic nervous system, the branch of the autonomic nervous system responsible for the fight-or-flight response. And within fractions of a second, a cascade of physiological changes sweeps through the entire body. The adrenal glands, sitting like small orange-colored caps atop each kidney, receive the sympathetic nervous system signal and begin releasing epinephrine, adrenaline, into the bloodstream. As epinephrine circulates, the heart rate accelerates, pushing oxygenated blood toward muscles and vital organs. Breathing quickens, expanding the lungs' capacity. The pupils dilate, admitting more light and more visual detail. Blood vessels in the skin constrict, routing blood toward the muscles that might need to act. Digestion slows, the metabolic resources are needed elsewhere. Muscle fibers throughout the body prepare for action, tensing with readiness. All of this happens in an instant, quite literally before conscious thought has fully formed. According to the research from Harvard Medical School and other leading institutions studying the stress response, the amygdala and hypothalamus can initiate this cascade even before the brain's visual processing centers have finished constructing a complete picture of what the eyes are seeing. This is why people can jump out of the path of an oncoming car before they have consciously registered it as a car. The reflex comes before the recognition. The body acts before the mind knows why. This is the fight-or-flight response, and it is one of the most elegant and robust survival mechanisms that evolution has ever produced. For hundreds of millions of years, the organisms that had fast, reliable threat detection, The ones who flinched first, who fled earliest, who responded before they had time to think, were the ones who survived long enough to pass their genes forward. The ones who paused to gather more information, to carefully assess whether the rustling in the tall grass was actually a predator or just the wind. Those organisms sometimes did not make it through the night. The result, baked into our evolutionary inheritance, is a brain that emphatically errs on the side of caution. A brain that would rather generate 100 false alarms than miss a single genuine threat. A brain designed around the asymmetry of consequences. A false alarm costs you nothing but a brief, unnecessary burst of adrenaline. A missed threat can cost you everything. This is what some researchers call the negativity bias, the built-in tendency of the threat detection system to weight potential danger much more heavily than equivalent potential safety. And it is not a bug. It is one of the primary features that allowed the human lineage to survive. This is something worth sitting with for a moment, because it has profound implications for why we feel the way we feel. The amygdala's fast, automatic, preconscious response means that your body has already begun responding to a perceived threat before you are even aware that you have perceived anything. Your heart is already accelerating, your muscles already subtly tensing, the physiological cascade already beginning, while your thinking mind is still constructing its first sentence about what might be happening. The felt sense of anxiety, of unease, of inexplicable tension, often comes not from conscious worry but from the body's response to signals processed far beneath awareness. You feel the response before you know the reason, and then, often, the thinking mind arrives and invents a reason to fit the feeling that was already there. This is one of the most important things to understand about anxiety and vigilance. The sequence runs backward from what we assume. We often believe that we feel anxious because we are thinking anxious thoughts. But frequently, it is the other way around. We are thinking anxious thoughts because the body is already in an anxious state, generated by the amygdala's response to something the neuroceptive system detected before conscious thought had any involvement. The body comes first. The story comes second. But this is only the first half of the stress response. Because when the initial surge of epinephrine begins to subside, assuming the threat has not resolved, assuming the alarm is still sounding, the hypothalamus activates the second, more sustained component of the stress response, a hormonal cascade known as the HPA axis, which stands for the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. This is a different kind of response running on a different hormone. The HPA axis involves the hypothalamus releasing a substance called corticotropin-releasing hormone, which travels to the pituitary gland, which in turn releases adrenocorticotropic hormone into the bloodstream, which travels to the adrenal cortex and prompts the release of cortisol. Cortisol is often described in popular culture as the stress hormone. And while that framing is a bit reductive, it captures something important, where adrenaline is the immediate, sharp spike of alarm. The burst that lasts seconds to minutes, cortisol is the sustained, slower-acting hormone of extended vigilance. Cortisol keeps the sympathetic nervous system's activity elevated. It maintains energy availability by mobilizing glucose and fatty acids. It modulates the immune system, suppressing certain inflammatory processes in the short term. And it keeps the organism in a state of heightened alertness, prepared for whatever comes next. Under normal conditions, short-term stress followed by resolution, the HPA axis functions beautifully. The threat appears, the alarm fires, The body responds. The threat passes. Cortisol levels drop. The parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest branch, the one that slows the heart, opens the digestion, allows the body to restore and repair, takes over. Equilibrium returns. The system has done its job perfectly. But what happens in the modern world, where most of the stresses we face are not tigers that appear and quickly either attack or retreat, but chronic, low-grade, persistent stresses, financial worry, relationship tension, occupational pressure, the accumulated weight of loss and uncertainty, the relentless pace of a world that never truly goes quiet. What happens to a nervous system that never fully receives the all-clear signal? The answer, supported by decades of research across neuroscience, endocrinology, and clinical medicine, is that the system begins to change. Researchers at institutions including Rockefeller University and the National Institutes of Mental Health have documented something called allostatic load, a term developed by neuroscientist Bruce McEwen to describe the cumulative wear and tear on the body's adaptive systems from prolonged or repeated activation of the stress response. Allostatic load is not a metaphor for feeling worn down. It is a measurable physiological process with documented effects on the structure and function of the brain itself. Under conditions of chronic stress and sustained elevated cortisol, the hippocampus, a seahorse-shaped structure sitting just beside the amygdala, critically important for memory formation and for the regulation of the HPA axis itself, can undergo structural changes. Glucocorticoid receptors throughout the hippocampus make it particularly sensitive to stress hormones. Under chronic exposure, hippocampal neurons can show what researchers call dendritic atrophy. The branching processes that connect neurons to one another literally shrink, reducing the density of synaptic connections. Neurogenesis in the dentate gyrus region of the hippocampus, the ongoing process by which new neurons are born and integrated into the existing circuitry, is suppressed. And hippocampal volume, which can be measured with neuroimaging, decreases in people who have experienced sustained periods of high stress or trauma. This matters for our story tonight because the hippocampus plays a crucial role in shutting off the HPA axis once a stressor has passed. When the hippocampus registers that the stress is over, when it processes the contextual information that says, the danger has resolved, it sends signals that down-regulate the stress response and allow cortisol to drop back to baseline. When the hippocampus is compromised by chronic stress, this regulatory function is weakened. The stress response becomes harder to turn off. The baseline cortisol level creeps upward, and the threshold at which the amygdala fires, at which the whole cascade begins, drops lower, so the alarm activates more easily in response to smaller and subtler cues. Meanwhile, the amygdala itself, also sensitive to stress hormones, is undergoing the opposite of what happens to the hippocampus. Under chronic stress, amygdala neurons can show increased dendritic growth, stronger connections, greater reactivity. The alarm system gets more sensitive. The brakes get weaker, and the result is a nervous system that has been, in the most literal neurobiological sense, recalibrated toward vigilance. The result is a system that has been, in the most literal neurobiological sense, recalibrated toward vigilance. The system that was designed to activate in emergencies has been reorganized so that the activation threshold is lower, the duration of activation is longer, and the recovery back to baseline is slower and less complete. The alarm is more sensitive and harder to silence. And the body, doing what bodies do, adapting to the conditions it faces, has incorporated this new calibration into its ongoing operations. This is not a malfunction. This is adaptation. This is the nervous system doing exactly what it learned to do, based on the world it actually lived in. And understanding this changes everything about how we approach the experience of feeling unsafe in a safe environment. The question is not what is wrong with me. The question is what has my nervous system learned, and how can I offer it something new to learn from? But this is only the beginning of the story, because beyond the amygdala and the HPA axis, there is another system, older, more subtle, more comprehensive, that is constantly and silently evaluating your safety. And it does so in a way that is entirely below the level of consciousness, in a way that your thinking brain can never fully override. It is called neuroception, and it is the nervous system's most ancient and most personal form of wisdom. In 1994, a neuroscientist named Stephen Porges, then at the University of Maryland, later at Indiana University's Kinsey Institute, was in the middle of a long and careful study of heart rate patterns in newborn and premature infants when he began to notice something that didn't fit cleanly into the existing scientific frameworks of his day. He was studying the vagus nerve, a long, meandering nerve sometimes called the wandering nerve because of the extraordinary breadth of its reach through the body and how its function related to behavioral states in infants. The vagus nerve is the 10th cranial nerve, originating in the brainstem and sending branches downward through the neck and into the chest and abdomen, touching the heart, the lungs, the larynx and pharynx, the esophagus, the stomach, the liver, the spleen, the kidneys, the intestines. It is the primary pathway of the parasympathetic nervous system's communication with the body's major organ systems. And what Porges noticed was that the vagus nerve seemed to be doing something far more interesting and complex than simply slowing the heart rate and calming the body. It seemed to be deeply involved in the social and behavioral life of the organism, in ways that existing frameworks hadn't fully accounted for. Over the following years, and continuing for decades, Porges developed these observations into what he called the polyvagal theory. Published formally in 1995, elaborated and extended through hundreds of research papers and several books, and now one of the most influential frameworks in all of clinical psychology, trauma therapy, and neuroscience. The theory describes the evolutionary development of the autonomic nervous system in vertebrates and proposes that what we have are not two systems, sympathetic and parasympathetic, but three functional circuits, each evolutionarily distinct, each doing different work in the service of survival. But what concerns us most tonight is a concept that Porges introduced in 2003 in a paper published in the journal 0 to 3. He coined the term neuroception, and in doing so, gave a name to something that had been happening to humans since the beginning of human time. Neuroception. Not perception, not the conscious, deliberate process of noticing and interpreting the world. Neuroception, the neural process by which the nervous system continuously, automatically, and entirely beneath the level of conscious awareness evaluates the environment for cues of safety, danger, or life-threatening risk. Take a moment to let that land. Your nervous system is doing this right now. It is scanning the quality of the sounds that reach your ears. Are they the harmless, low-frequency sounds of the natural nighttime world? The soft, irregular patterns of wind and water and distant traffic? Or are there sharp, high-frequency sounds, rapid, irregular rhythms, the qualities of sound associated with threat? It is processing the temperature and quality of the air you're breathing. It is registering the textures of what your skin touches, the feel of the bed or the chair, the weight of clothing or blankets. It is monitoring your internal environment, the state of your digestion, the tension in your muscles, the rhythm of your heartbeat, the quality of your breath. And if there are other people nearby, it is almost certainly processing the subtle cues embedded in their presence. The quality of any sounds they make, the energy of their presence, whether their own nervous systems are broadcasting signals of regulation and safety or something else entirely. All of this evaluation is happening continuously, without your participation or awareness, through very ancient neural circuits that exist below and beyond the reach of the conscious, reasoning mind. And based on the conclusions this process generates, safe or dangerous or life-threatening, the nervous system automatically shifts its physiological state accordingly. Porges introduced this term precisely because existing language, perception, awareness, noticing, all implied consciousness, deliberate attention, the involvement of the thinking mind. Neuroception is none of these things. It is a neural event, not a mental one. It happens in the same category of events as your heartbeat and your digestion. Events governed by the autonomic nervous system that proceed independently of your will, your awareness, and your intentions. And here is where it becomes deeply relevant to our topic tonight. Neuroception does not require an obvious, identifiable threat to generate a state of alertness. It can be triggered and can persist in response to the subtlest and most ambiguous features of the environment. The quality of the light, an unfamiliar sound at the edge of hearing, the absence of the particular safety cues that the system has learned to associate with genuine rest, the residue of a difficult day still metabolizing through the nervous system, the imperceptible tension in someone else's voice or posture. But beyond the immediate environment, neuroception is also shaped, profoundly shaped, by the accumulated history of the organism. The nervous system doesn't evaluate each moment in a vacuum. It evaluates each moment through the lens of everything it has ever experienced. Every encounter with safety, every experience of threat, every learned association between particular sensory cues and particular outcomes. The person who grew up in a household where the evenings were genuinely quiet and safe has a nervous system that, over years, has learned to associate evening quiet with rest, with safety, with the reliable arrival of care. The person who grew up in a household where the evenings were unpredictable, where quiet could erupt into something frightening without warning, has a nervous system that has learned a different association. That has learned, in fact, to be more vigilant precisely in the quiet moments, because the quiet moments were when it could no longer read the situation and had to prepare for anything. These learned associations are not stored as explicit memories, retrievable through conscious recall. They are stored in the body, in the calibration of the neuroceptive system, in the thresholds and patterns of the autonomic nervous system. They operate automatically. They don't require you to remember anything. They are simply there, doing their work, shaping the physiological context of every moment. This is one of the reasons, one of the most important reasons, why people sometimes find themselves feeling inexplicably uneasy in situations that objectively seem perfectly fine. Why the vacation feels vaguely wrong. Why the quiet evening generates restlessness rather than ease. Why sleep feels just out of reach even when everything external is perfectly arranged for it. The explicit mind, the conscious, rational, reasoning part, looks around and sees safety. But the neuroceptive system, running on its own older, deeper logic, is telling a different story. And the body follows the neuroceptive story. Always. Porges also described what he called faulty neuroception. Instances where the neuroceptive system generates a threat response in the absence of any objective threat, or fails to register genuine danger because the system's calibration has been distorted by history. Both directions are possible. A nervous system that has experienced prolonged or severe stress may develop neuroceptive patterns that lean heavily toward detecting threat, that read ambiguous situations as dangerous, that find safety hard to believe, that treat the unfamiliar as automatically suspect. Conversely, a system that has been so persistently overwhelmed that it has partially shut down may fail to register some genuine dangers, having learned that the alarm is too costly to sustain. The key insight, and this is something that has been transformative for people working in psychology, in therapy, in trauma recovery, in simply understanding themselves, is that these responses are not the products of irrational thinking or poor judgment. They are the products of a nervous system that has learned from experience. A nervous system that is, in fact, doing exactly what it was designed to do. The problem, if we want to call it that, is not that the system is malfunctioning. The problem is that the world it learned from is different from the world it currently inhabits. The data is old. The map no longer quite matches the territory. And this distinction between the system being broken and the system being calibrated to a different reality is not a minor semantic point. It is the difference between shame and compassion, between what's wrong with me and what happened to me, between fighting the nervous system and working with it gently, patiently, towards something new. To fully understand neuroception and why the nervous system responds the way it does, it helps enormously to have a clear map of the three primary states that polyvagal theory describes, the states that the nervous system moves between based on what neuroception is detecting in any given moment. Porges organized these states in an evolutionary hierarchy, from the most recently evolved to the most ancient, and the ordering of that hierarchy is not accidental. The system is designed to try the most sophisticated, most social, most metabolically expensive option first, and to move toward the older, more primitive options only when the newer ones prove insufficient. The newest and most sophisticated state is what Porges calls the ventral vagal state, named for the ventral vagal complex, a set of brainstem structures from which the myelinated branch of the vagus nerve originates. The word myelinated refers to the myelin sheath, a fatty insulating layer that wraps around certain nerve fibers and dramatically increases the speed and precision with which they conduct signals. The myelinated vagus is unique to mammals. It did not exist in the nervous systems of reptiles or earlier vertebrates. It is, in evolutionary terms, new. When the ventral vagal state is active, when neuroception is detecting genuine safety in the environment, the body enters a state that is qualitatively different from mere calm. It is not just the absence of threat. It is the presence of something positive, a physiological condition that supports and enables the full range of what human beings can do and be. Heart rate is regulated and flexible, able to speed up or slow down responsively. Breathing is slow, full, and rhythmic. The muscles of the face, the muscles around the eyes, the forehead, the mouth are soft and animated. The voice takes on warmth and melody, that quality we call prosody, the musicality of genuine connection. The middle ear muscles, tiny structures that actually tune the inner ear to preferentially process the frequency range of the human voice, contract in a way that makes speech easier to understand and background noise easier to filter out. You can make eye contact comfortably and warmly. You feel present, curious, open, able to play and to laugh and to think clearly. The ventral vagal state is the state of genuine human connection. It is the state in which two nervous systems can actually meet each other in what Porges calls co-regulation, where one person's calm, regulated physiology can directly influence and stabilize another's through the cues of safety they broadcast in their voice, their face, and their posture. It is the state in which learning happens most readily, in which creativity flows, in which sleep comes naturally and is genuinely restorative, in which the body's housekeeping functions, digestion, immune surveillance, cellular repair, the consolidation of memories during sleep, can proceed without interference. In the language of trauma-informed psychology, this is the window of tolerance. That zone of arousal within which you have access to your full humanity and your full cognitive capacity. This is the state that evolution optimized you for when the world is safe. It is the state in which humans thrive. The second state in polyvagal theory's hierarchy is the sympathetic mobilization state, the fight or flight state. This is mediated by the spinal sympathetic nervous system, a set of neural structures that evolved earlier than the myelinated vagus and that exists in most vertebrates. When neuroception detects a threat that might potentially be dealt with through action, something that could be fought or fled, the sympathetic state activates, and the ventral vagal brake is released. We've already described this state in some detail. The heart rate acceleration, the quickened breathing, the tunnel-focused attention, the mobilized muscles, the slowing of digestion, the narrowing of social engagement. All of this is the body's intelligent preparation for action. It is not a problem. It is an adaptive response, one that has saved countless lives across the history of the species. The problem arises when this state is activated chronically, when it is not followed by the resolution it was designed for, when the body remains in it day after day and the system's resources are slowly depleted. The third and most ancient state is the dorsal vagal immobilization state, mediated by the unmyelinated dorsal vagus, the oldest branch of the vagus nerve, shared by virtually all vertebrates and predating the evolution of mammals by hundreds of millions of years. The dorsal vagal state is the body's deepest emergency brake. It activates when the nervous system concludes that neither fighting nor fleeing is possible, that the threat is inescapable, that there is nothing to be done. In this state, the physiology goes into a kind of protective shutdown. Heart rate drops, sometimes dramatically. Breathing becomes shallow and slow. Muscle tone decreases. Metabolism slows. The person may feel suddenly and profoundly fatigued, heavy, disconnected, foggy. There may be a quality of emotional flatness, a sense of observing oneself from a distance, the world going slightly unreal. In the animal world, this is the freeze response, the possum going limp, the rabbit that goes motionless in the grass. And it serves a real biological function. A predator may lose interest in prey that has stopped moving, and the endogenous opioids released during this state can reduce the experience of pain, making severe injury or attack more survivable. In humans, this state can appear during overwhelming experiences as a kind of dissociation, a profound disconnection from the body and the immediate environment. Or it can show up more subtly in the chronic form that characterizes what many people describe as depression. Not the sadness of acute loss, but the flatness, the going through the motions, the inability to feel fully present in one's own life. These three states are not things you choose to be in. They are physiological states that the nervous system enters automatically, based on the continuous neuroceptive evaluation of the environment. Each state comes with its own package of physiological changes, its own emotional tone, its own cognitive capacities and limitations, its own way of being in the body. and the nervous system moves between them based on what it detects. Moving down the hierarchy when the current state proves insufficient for the level of threat, moving back up toward the ventral vagal state when safety cues are reliably present. For people whose nervous systems have been shaped by histories of chronic stress or adversity, this movement can be sticky. The system can get stuck, unable to move back up to ventral vagal even when objective safety is present, because it has learned to mistrust safety cues, or because it has been in the lower states for so long that they have become its new baseline. Understanding this stickiness and understanding it with compassion rather than judgment is one of the most important insights that polyvagal theory offers to anyone trying to understand why they feel the way they feel. There is a paradox that lies at the very heart of what we're exploring tonight, and it is one of the most quietly profound things that neuroscience has discovered about the human nervous system. For some people, under certain conditions, calm itself can register as threatening. Stillness can feel less safe than stress. Quiet can produce more alertness than noise. Rest can feel like the least restful thing of all. This is not a metaphor, and it is not a character flaw. It is neurobiology. Research published across multiple peer-reviewed journals has documented what clinicians and therapists have long observed in practice. A phenomenon called relaxation-induced anxiety, in which the very act of attempting to relax, meditation, quiet evenings, weekends free of obligation, vacations deliberately arranged for rest, can paradoxically produce anxiety rather than the ease that was expected. People who have lived for extended periods with high levels of stress, people with generalized anxiety disorder, people who carry what trauma researchers call a history of adverse experiences. All of these groups can experience the onset of rest as something that feels, at the level of the body, more like exposure than like relief. Why? To understand this, we need to think about what the nervous system actually does with experience over time. The nervous system is not a static instrument. It is a learning system, deeply and profoundly shaped by the patterns of experience it has processed. Every repeated experience leaves a trace. Every consistent pattern, this stimulus, that response, this situation, that outcome, becomes over time a prediction. And the nervous system's primary job at the most fundamental level is not to perceive the present moment accurately. Its primary job is to predict what is about to happen so that the body can be prepared. Now imagine a nervous system that has spent years, perhaps many years, operating in an environment of unpredictability. Perhaps this is a childhood experience of living with a parent whose moods were volatile and hard to read, where the emotional atmosphere of the home could shift without warning, and the times of apparent quiet were sometimes the most dangerous, because they were the held breath moment before something difficult happened. The nervous system of a child in that environment does something extraordinarily intelligent. It learns to use quiet not as a cue for rest, but as a cue for heightened attention. It learns, based on actual experience, that the absence of obvious threat is not the same thing as safety, that safety has to be actively and continuously verified. And that habit of verification, built in the crucible of genuine unpredictability, can persist for decades after the original environment has been left behind. Or perhaps it is not a childhood situation at all, but a prolonged period of adult stress, a job with persistent high-stakes demands, a relationship in sustained difficulty, a period of financial uncertainty that lasted long enough for the body to stop treating it as temporary and begin treating it as the normal condition of life. During any such period, the nervous system adapts to its environment. Day after day of sustained low-level activation, the slight elevation in cortisol, the slight increase in baseline sympathetic tone, The amygdala, a little more sensitized, begins to feel normal. Not comfortable necessarily, but familiar, recognizable, in a certain sense, reliable. Then one day the stress eases. Or an evening comes when the work is done and the house is quiet and there is, genuinely, nothing that needs immediate attention. And the nervous system, encountering this stillness, does something unexpected. It registers the change as anomalous. Something is different. The baseline has changed. And for a nervous system trained to treat change as potential threat, this anomaly carries a mild but real alarm signal. A writer and educator named Deb Dana, who has spent years translating polyvagal theory into accessible language for therapeutic practice, describes this with a beautiful clarity. When you have lived so long in a state of dysregulation that it has become your baseline, dropping into a regulated, calm state can feel like falling, like losing your footing, like something important has been let go of. The regulated state is unfamiliar, and unfamiliar states trigger the neuroceptive system's cautionary attention. Calm becomes, paradoxically, a cue for increased alertness. There is also a physiological dimension to this phenomenon worth exploring in some detail. When the external environment becomes very quiet, when the noise and activity of the day drops away, and there is no longer a stream of urgent demands pulling the attention outward, something that was being diluted by all that noise and activity can suddenly come into much sharper focus. The internal environment. The body's own sensations, the quality of the breath, the beat of the heart, the subtle tensions held in the muscles, the residual charge of stress hormones still metabolizing through the tissues, the undischarged energy of stress responses that were activated during the day but never given physical expression. In a busy, noisy environment, all of these internal sensations are present, but they are mixed into a rich sensory environment that provides constant external reference and distraction. In stillness, they can suddenly seem much louder, much closer, more demanding of attention for people who have accumulated significant unprocessed stress. And this describes a substantial portion of the human population in the contemporary world. This sudden amplification of the internal signal can feel uncomfortable, even distressing. The body begins trying to process what it has been carrying. Muscles that have been held in tension may want to move, to release the mobilized energy of stress responses that were never completed. Emotions that were tamped down during the busy day may begin to surface. Thoughts that were held at bay by perpetual productivity may rise into awareness. All of this is actually intelligent, healthy activity. The body and nervous system doing their essential work of processing and integrating experience. But in the moment, it can feel like anxiety, like an inability to simply be still, like evidence that something is wrong, when in fact it is the first stages of the body beginning to repair itself. The psychologist and anxiety researcher Thomas Borkovec spent decades studying the function of worry in people with generalized anxiety disorder, and identified what he called the contrast avoidance model. The observation that people who worry chronically may be using their persistent state of low-level concern as a protective buffer against the painful emotional contrast that would accompany receiving bad news when fully relaxed. If you are always somewhat braced, always maintaining a low-level posture of readiness, then when something difficult happens, the drop is smaller. You never have very far to fall. The worry, paradoxically, serves as a kind of emotional insurance policy. It is not irrational. It is, in its way, a very intelligent strategy. It just comes at an enormous cost. The cost is this: the body never fully rests. The nervous system never fully receives the signal that safety is available and that its vigilance work is, at least temporarily, complete. The window of tolerance, that zone of optimal arousal in which the full range of human experience and human capacity is accessible, remains narrow, easily exceeded by the ordinary stresses of a normal day. Sleep is lighter and less restorative than it should be. The quality of presence, the ability to be genuinely here, genuinely engaged with the people and experiences that matter, is diminished because a portion of one's processing resources is always allocated to that background scanning and monitoring and preparing. And so we find ourselves in a cycle. The nervous system has adapted to a world of sustained stress by calibrating itself for sustained vigilance. That calibration makes it harder to receive the genuine safety that is available, which maintains the state of vigilance, which maintains the calibration, which makes it harder to rest, which maintains the stress. The cycle is self-reinforcing, not because of any flaw in the person caught in it, but because the nervous system is doing exactly what learning systems do. Updating its predictions based on the most recent evidence, and the most recent evidence keeps confirming that vigilance is necessary. Breaking this cycle requires not force, not willpower, not the determination to simply decide to feel differently. It requires something more fundamental: new experiences, new data, the gradual, patient accumulation of moments in which the body discovers, through direct embodied experience, not through being told, but through feeling, that safety is real, that calm does not precede catastrophe, that the quiet room is genuinely quiet and the night is genuinely kind. There is also something worth understanding about the particular quality of nighttime vigilance, why the alertness so often intensifies in the specific hours of darkness and quiet, even for people who function reasonably well during the day. Part of the answer lies in what the quiet removes. During the active hours of the day, there is an almost continuous stream of external input that occupies the attention. Tasks to complete, conversations to navigate, problems to solve, decisions to make, sensory information to process. All of this external engagement is, in a sense, regulating. It gives the nervous system something to do with its energy. It channels the activation of the sympathetic system toward useful work. It provides a constant stream of social co-regulatory input, other people's faces and voices, that helps maintain ventral vagal tone. And it gives the mind something to focus on other than itself. When the day ends and the quiet comes, all of that scaffolding falls away. The external engagement stops. The social input drops to near zero. The mind, deprived of its usual occupation, turns inward. And the nervous system, which has been operating at a certain level of activation throughout the day, finds itself suddenly without the structure that was providing some of its regulation. The activation that was being channeled outward into activity now has nowhere useful to go. Turns inward as well. This is the moment when the body's unprocessed cargo from the day, the stress hormones that never quite metabolized, the emotions that were set aside for the sake of functioning, the small accumulated frictions and anxieties that didn't get resolved, can surface into awareness. The internal volume goes up as the external volume goes down. And for a nervous system already calibrated toward vigilance, this sudden amplification of the internal signal can feel less like the body settling down and more like it beginning to speak. Some sleep researchers describe this as the hyperarousal model of insomnia. the inability to fall asleep or stay asleep driven not primarily by circumstances but by a chronically elevated level of physiological and cognitive arousal that prevents the body from transitioning into the lower arousal states required for sleep onset. Research consistently finds that people with insomnia show elevated heart rates, higher body core temperatures, elevated cortisol, and increased metabolic rates compared to good sleepers. Not just at sleep onset, but throughout the night and even during the day. The activation is not just a nighttime phenomenon. It is a chronic physiological state that the evening simply makes more perceptible. Understanding this helps explain why the common advice to just relax at bedtime is so frustratingly ineffective for many people. The instruction to relax presupposes that the body is in a position to simply choose to lower its activation. But for a chronically aroused nervous system, the activation is not a choice. It is a physiological state maintained by all the mechanisms we've been discussing. Telling it to relax is like telling a fire to cool down. Technically possible, but not something that happens on command. What works, what the research consistently shows works, is precisely the kind of gentle, patient, embodied approach we've been exploring, working with the body's own physiology rather than against it, using the voluntary pathways that do exist, the breath, the movement of the attention, the activation of the parasympathetic system through specific somatic practices, to gradually and repeatedly demonstrate to the nervous system that its vigilance can safely be eased. This is the practice of returning, not arriving, not achieving, not fixing, just returning again and again to the breath and the body and the immediate safety of the present moment, until the returning itself becomes a familiar path that the nervous system begins to recognize and trust. We need to go a little deeper now into the question of how past experiences shape the present-day nervous system in ways that are not merely psychological, not merely a matter of thinking about or remembering what has happened, but genuinely biological. Encoded in the architecture of neural circuits, in the calibration of hormone systems, in the functional organization of regions of the brain. The psychiatrist and researcher Bessel van der Kolk, whose decades of work studying PTSD and the nervous system produced the landmark book, The Body Keeps the Score, published in 2014 and translated into over 40 languages, articulated something that has since been extensively supported by neuroimaging research and neurobiological studies. Traumatic stress, and to varying degrees chronic stress of any kind, is not merely a psychological experience. It is a somatic event. It is stored in the tissues, in the nervous system, in the patterns of muscle tension and posture, in the calibration of stress response systems, in the functional organization of the brain. One of the central insights in van der Kolk's work is that traumatic and overwhelming stress memories are encoded differently in the brain than ordinary autobiographical memories. Ordinary memories, what you had for dinner last week, a conversation you had with a friend, the details of your morning, are processed through the hippocampus, which provides them with what might be called a time and place stamp. Ordinary memories are filed with a clear sense of when they occurred. They are located in the past. They know that they are memories. Traumatic and overwhelming experiences, however, can disrupt this hippocampal processing. Under conditions of extreme stress, the elevated levels of cortisol and other stress hormones can interfere with the hippocampus's ability to fully encode the contextual information that would anchor the memory firmly in a specific past moment. The experience is encoded, powerfully and vividly encoded, because stress hormones enhance the encoding of emotionally salient information. but without the full temporal and contextual framework that would situate it clearly as something that happened then and not now. The result is a form of memory that can be triggered by present sensory cues and feel in the body as though the past event is occurring in the present moment. Not as a thought, not as a conscious recollection, but as a felt body state, the elevated heart rate, the muscle tension, the altered quality of breath. That is indistinguishable from the response that was generated during the original event. This is not confined to what we typically call trauma in the clinical sense, the dramatic, identifiable single events or sustained periods of acute threat that meet diagnostic criteria. The same basic mechanisms apply in varying degrees to the accumulated effects of chronic everyday stress. The neuroscientist Bruce McEwen's concept of allostatic load describes the gradual, cumulative physiological toll of sustained stress response activation. And what the research shows is that allostatic load has measurable structural effects on the brain. Under chronically elevated cortisol, the hippocampus shows reductions in dendritic branching density. The complexity and richness of its neural connections decreases. Neurogenesis in the dentate gyrus. The ongoing production of new neurons, that is one of the mechanisms supporting hippocampal plasticity and cognitive function, is suppressed. Studies using high-resolution MRI have found that people with histories of prolonged stress, particularly those who have experienced depression, PTSD, or significant adverse childhood experiences, show on average smaller hippocampal volumes than people without those histories. And this structural change has functional consequences. Reduced hippocampal function means reduced capacity to regulate the HPA axis, which means the stress response is harder to turn off, which means cortisol stays elevated longer, which further suppresses hippocampal function. At the same time, the amygdala undergoes changes in the opposite direction. Under chronic stress, amygdala neurons can actually show increased dendritic complexity. Their connections become more elaborate, not less. And neuroimaging studies, including a substantial body of research in people with PTSD, have consistently found elevated resting state activity and connectivity in the amygdala, an alarm system that has been turned up that stays more active even in the absence of any obvious threat, that responds to emotional stimuli more quickly and more strongly than it would in a stress-naive nervous system. The prefrontal cortex, particularly the ventromedial and dorsolateral regions that are critical for emotional regulation, executive function, and the cognitive capacity to override automatic fear responses, also shows changes under chronic stress. Research has found reduced volume and reduced functional connectivity between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala in individuals with significant stress histories. This is precisely the neural pathway that allows rational assessment to reach down and reassure the alarm, that allows the thinking brain to tell the ancient brain, hey, that noise was just the refrigerator, not a threat. When this pathway is weakened, the alarm fires more easily and the thinking brain has less influence over its expression. The result is a brain that, at the level of its physical architecture, has been shaped by its history. With a more reactive alarm system, a less effective regulatory brake, and a reduced capacity to accurately situate past experiences as past rather than as ongoing present threats. The ACE, Adverse Childhood Experiences. Studies, which followed tens of thousands of adults over years and examined the relationship between early life adversity and adult health outcomes, found strong dose-response relationships between the number and severity of adverse childhood experiences and the risk of a wide range of health conditions in adulthood, including not only mental health conditions like depression and anxiety, but physical conditions including cardiovascular disease, diabetes, obesity, autoimmune disorders, and cancer. The biological mechanisms connecting early adversity to these later health outcomes run directly through the nervous system and the HPA axis. Through the way early experiences calibrate the stress response, through allostatic load, through the chronic downstream physiological effects of a body that has been spending too many years at too high a level of activation. None of this is deterministic. The brain is not a fixed structure. One of the most genuinely hopeful discoveries of modern neuroscience is the lifelong plasticity of the brain. Neuroplasticity, the brain's capacity to change its structure and function in response to new experiences throughout the entire lifespan, not just in childhood. The same plasticity that allowed adverse experiences to reshape the nervous system can be engaged, through the right conditions, to reshape it again in more adaptive directions. Research examining the neurobiological effects of various therapeutic and wellness practices consistently finds measurable changes in nervous system function over time. Yoga, practiced regularly over several weeks, has been shown to increase hippocampal volume and gray matter density in regions associated with self-awareness and emotional regulation. Mindfulness-based practices produce measurable reductions in amygdala reactivity and improvements in prefrontal amygdala connectivity. EMDR and other trauma-focused therapies show changes in the way the brain processes traumatic memories, with neuroimaging studies documenting shifts in the patterns of neural activation that occur during memory recall. Even consistent aerobic exercise has been shown to promote neurogenesis in the hippocampus and improve HPA axis regulation. The body that learned to be vigilant can learn something different. Not through force, not through demanding of itself that it simply stop responding as it has been responding, but through the gentle, patient, consistent accumulation of new experiences. Through the repeated experience of activating and then recovering, of the heart rate rising and then slowing back down, of the alertness arising and then releasing, of the body discovering, again and again in small doses, that safety returns. Through the building of new neural pathways, new predictions, a new default, written slowly, one quiet moment at a time. There is a way of holding everything we've explored tonight: the amygdala's hair trigger responses, the persistent cortisol elevation, the difficulty trusting calm, the body's reluctance to let go. That is, I think, the single most important thing to carry away from this conversation. And it is this: your nervous system is not your enemy. Whatever state your nervous system is in right now, whether you feel genuinely at rest, or whether there is still that familiar undercurrent of watchfulness moving beneath the surface, that state is not evidence of something wrong with you. It is evidence of a nervous system that has been paying attention, that has been learning, that has been working with extraordinary diligence and loyalty to keep you safe based on everything it knows about what the world requires. Porges writes that every autonomic state is an adaptive response. Every fight or flight activation, no matter how disproportionate it seems to the triggering circumstance, makes sense when you understand what the nervous system has learned about what certain cues historically predict. Every shutting down, every numbing, every going through the motions disconnection from the world. These are the body's most intelligent available responses to situations where engagement felt impossible and shutdown was the best protection available. The nervous system is not irrational. It is rational in a deep, embodied way, rational according to the logic of survival under the conditions it has actually experienced, rather than the conditions it currently inhabits. This reframe, from broken to adaptive, from malfunctioning to responding intelligently to a real history, is not just philosophically kinder. It is neurologically consequential, because shame and self-judgment are themselves activators of the stress response system. The inner voice that says, "I should be able to relax, I'm being ridiculous, why can't I just calm down," is not, from the nervous system's perspective, a calming influence. It is another form of threat. The nervous system cannot distinguish between an external threat and the internal threat of harsh self-criticism. Both activate the amygdala. Both elevate cortisol. Both maintain the system in a state of defensive readiness that makes the very rest you are trying to achieve more difficult to access. Research on self-compassion, developed and extensively studied by the psychologist Kristen Neff at the University of Texas at Austin, consistently finds that self-compassion, treating one's own difficult experiences and difficult feelings with the same kindness and understanding one would offer to a dear friend, is associated with measurably lower levels of cortisol, lower inflammatory markers, reduced anxiety and depression, and better capacity for emotional regulation. Self-compassion is not softness or self-indulgence. It is a physiologically active practice. The kindness you bring to yourself is not a secondary concern. It is quite literally medicine. The concept of the window of tolerance, introduced by the neuroscientist and clinical psychiatrist Daniel Siegel and applied extensively in trauma-informed therapeutic approaches, offers a useful image for thinking about nervous system regulation. Imagine a zone of optimal arousal, not too activated, not too shut down. Inside this zone, you have access to your thinking, your emotions, your creativity, your warmth, your capacity for genuine rest and genuine connection. This is the window. Above the window is hyperarousal, the sympathetic fight or flight state, with its racing heart and rushing thoughts and emotional flooding and reactivity that seems out of proportion. Below the window is hypoarousal, the dorsal vagal shutdown state, with its flatness and numbness and disconnection and sense of going through the motions. Both of these states are outside the window, outside the zone in which the full range of human capacity is available. For people who have experienced chronic stress or adversity, the window can become quite narrow. Small things that other people can process without being thrown outside the window. A slightly irritable tone in someone's voice, a moment of uncertainty about the future, the ordinary ups and downs of a normal day, can be enough to tip the system above or below. And the recovery, the return to the window after being pushed outside it, can take longer and require more effort. Not because of any fundamental flaw, but because the window has been narrowed by experience, and the system has less flexibility available. The goal of nervous system regulation, the goal, in fact, of much good therapy and good self-care, is to widen this window. Not to eliminate the stress response, which is both impossible and undesirable, but to gradually build the body's capacity to stay within the window of optimal arousal across a wider range of circumstances, and to return to it more quickly and more easily after being pushed outside. To increase what researchers call autonomic flexibility, the capacity to move between states of activation and calm fluidly, responsively, without getting stuck in either extreme. And here is something beautiful. This widening happens naturally through the accumulation of experiences of returning. Every time the system is activated and then allowed to recover, every time the heart rate rises and then settles, every time the breath quickens and then slows, every time the alertness rises and then gently releases, the system is building a record of that recovery. Building evidence in the body that activation is not permanent, that the alarm does end, that safety returns. And with each instance of that return, the window grows slightly wider. The recovery grows slightly faster. The system accumulates, through direct embodied experience, a new kind of confidence. This is not quick work. It is the work of months and years, not days. But it is real work with real and measurable neurobiological correlates. The brain changes, the body learns, and every small, gentle return to safety, every slow breath, every moment of noticing that this moment is actually okay, is a brick in the building of a nervous system that knows what calm is and trusts it. There is one more dimension of this story that deserves its own space tonight, because it is both scientifically important and deeply humanizing, and it may be the most comforting thing we discuss. You are not biologically designed to regulate your nervous system alone. This is not a statement about weakness or inadequacy. It is a statement about how human nervous systems actually work, what they were actually built for, and what they require to function at their best. The social engagement system, the ventral vagal circuit that polyvagal theory describes, is not just a state of individual calm. It is a system specifically designed for connection. And one of its primary regulatory functions is the effect one regulated nervous system has on another. Porges uses the term co-regulation to describe this process. The capacity of one nervous system to stabilize another through the broadcast of safety signals. When you are in the presence of someone whose own nervous system is genuinely regulated, someone who is not performing calm but actually inhabiting it, whose heart rate is slow and variable, whose vagal tone is high, whose voice carries the warm musicality of the ventral vagal state, your nervous system receives those signals. The neuroceptive process detects them, and it begins to shift toward the same state. This is why a calm, regulated caregiver can soothe a distressed infant simply through the quality of their presence, through the warmth and steadiness of their voice, the softness of their face, the regulated rhythm of their breath, without any words, without any explanations. The infant's nervous system receives the co-regulatory signal and begins to mirror it. Heart rates literally synchronize between attuned parent and child. This is not metaphor. It is measurable. And it does not stop in childhood. Adults co-regulate each other constantly throughout their lives. The presence of a trusted, genuinely calm person can shift our physiology measurably. Research on social support and health outcomes, which is one of the most robust and extensively replicated bodies of evidence in all of health psychology, consistently finds that people with strong social connections have better health outcomes, lower mortality rates, lower rates of depression and anxiety, and better functioning of their HPA axis. The Harvard study of adult development, one of the longest-running studies of human happiness and health ever conducted, spanning over 8 decades of tracking hundreds of participants, found that the quality of a person's relationships was the single strongest predictor of both their physical health in later life and their subjective sense of well-being and happiness. Not wealth, not achievement, not intelligence. The quality of their relationships. And the mechanism for at least part of this effect runs through exactly what we've been discussing tonight: the regulatory effect of secure, trusted human connection on the autonomic nervous system. People with warm, reliable social bonds have physiological signatures of better autonomic regulation, higher heart rate variability, more responsive HPA axis, lower baseline cortisol, that translate directly into better health outcomes across every system the body contains. This helps explain something that many people find puzzling: why anxiety and dysregulation often feel so much worse at night, alone in the dark, than they do in the middle of the day. Partly this is about the absence of the external stimulation and activity that occupies the attention and provides some regulation during waking hours. But partly it is about the absence of the co-regulatory input from other people. The social engagement system, deprived of its natural input. The face of another human being, the voice of someone who cares, can become more active in its searching, more aware of its own unease, more in need of the signals it is not receiving. This does not mean that being alone is inherently dysregulating, or that solitude is something to be avoided. The well-regulated nervous system can inhabit solitude with genuine pleasure, can find in aloneness a kind of spaciousness and freedom. But for a nervous system that is already struggling to find safety, the absence of co-regulatory input removes one of the most powerful regulatory resources available. And knowing this, understanding it as a biological need rather than a character weakness, can help us approach both our need for connection and our difficulty being alone with more compassion and less judgment. It also points towards some practical understanding. When the night is difficult, when the alertness won't release and the body won't settle, reaching toward connection is not weakness. Listening to a warm human voice, even through a recording, even through a podcast or a video like this one, activates some portion of the social engagement system. The prosody of speech, the rhythm and warmth of a voice, speak directly to the neuroceptive system's detector for social safety. This is part of why ASMR has found such a large and devoted audience. The gentle, close vocal sounds that ASMR content typically features closely match the acoustic profile of the social engagement system's safety cues. The quiet, high-frequency, rhythmic sounds of a calm, attentive, close human presence. Music activates the same systems. Throughout human evolutionary history, collective singing, the shared creation of organized sound, has been one of the most reliable ways of generating a communal state of ventral vagal regulation. Music with certain qualities, slow tempos, harmonically resolved progressions, warm timbres, minimal dissonance, matches the acoustic profile of the social engagement safety signals and can produce measurable parasympathetic activation even in solitude. Research on music and the autonomic nervous system finds that certain kinds of music reliably produce reductions in heart rate, blood pressure, cortisol, and self-reported anxiety, and that these effects are most pronounced in music with tempos around 60 beats per minute, which is approximately the resting heart rate, and harmonically simple, resolved structures. The human voice reading gently in the dark, this voice right now is another form of this. It is not nothing. The science says it is quite specifically something. A stream of acoustic information that your social engagement system is processing and responding to in the quiet ways that neuroception works, below and beside the level of what you consciously attend to. You are not alone in this darkness. You never quite are, as long as sound and voice and the deep ancient wiring of connection remain available. And your nervous system, in its extraordinary sensitivity, knows this too. So what can we actually do in this moment and in the days that follow to help the nervous system learn its way towards safety? What does the science suggest practically and specifically about the pathways that are available? The first and most immediate answer begins with something so simple that it might seem almost trivially obvious: the breath. But what the science actually says about breath is not obvious at all, and understanding it can change the way you relate to your own breathing in a way that is genuinely useful. The vagus nerve, that long wandering nerve whose role in polyvagal theory we've explored, has a special and intimate relationship with the breathing cycle. During inhalation, the diaphragm descends and the chest expands, and this mechanical change in the chest cavity slightly stretches the vagus nerve's cardiac branch, producing a brief withdrawal of vagal tone and a corresponding subtle increase in heart rate. During exhalation, the diaphragm rises, the chest contracts, and the vagus nerve's tone increases. It releases acetylcholine, which acts directly on the sinoatrial node of the heart and slows the heart rate. This is the physiological basis of respiratory sinus arrhythmia, the natural, healthy fluctuation of heart rate across the breathing cycle, and heart rate variability, the measure of this fluctuation, is one of the most robust physiological markers of autonomic nervous system health. Higher heart rate variability, meaning a more pronounced fluctuation, reflects greater parasympathetic influence and greater autonomic flexibility. Lower heart rate variability reflects sympathetic dominance and reduced regulatory capacity. Now, here is the crucial practical implication. Because the exhalation phase specifically increases vagal tone, breathing patterns with longer exhalations than inhalations have a direct, measurable, physiological effect on the autonomic nervous system. Research published in journals including Scientific Reports, the Journal of Applied Physiology, and elsewhere consistently finds that slow breathing with extended exhalation increases high-frequency heart rate variability, reduces sympathetic nervous system activity, reduces levels of cortisol, and produces subjective improvements in calm and emotional regulation. This is not placebo. This is direct physiological intervention through the one voluntary pathway you have into the autonomic nervous system, the breath. A simple starting practice. Breathe in slowly through the nose, counting to 4. Breathe out slowly through the nose or mouth, counting to 6 or 8. The ratio matters more than the exact numbers. The exhalation should be longer than the inhalation. As you breathe out, you can let the body soften slightly with the exhalation. Shoulders dropping, jaw unclenching, the belly releasing. You don't need to force anything. You only need to allow the exhalation to be complete. The 4-7-8 technique, popularized by integrative medicine physician Dr. Andrew Weil and rooted in pranayama yoga practices that have existed for thousands of years, extends this principle. Inhale for 4 counts, hold for 7, exhale for 8. The extended hold allows the body to absorb the oxygenated air before the long exhalation fully activates the vagal brake. Many people find this technique helpful for sleep. Research suggests it reduces heart rate and blood pressure in ways that support the transition into sleep. The physiological sigh, studied by researchers at Stanford University including Andrew Huberman and David Spiegel in randomized controlled trials, involves a double inhale. 1 full breath through the nose, and then, at the very top of that breath, 1 brief additional sniff to fully expand the lungs, followed by a long, slow exhalation. The inflation of the alveoli, the tiny air sacs in the lungs that can partially collapse during shallow breathing, triggers stretch receptors that send signals to the brainstem, activating the parasympathetic system. In the Stanford trials, even 5 minutes per day of this practice was associated with measurably improved mood and reduced physiological stress markers. Beyond the breath, there are other pathways worth knowing about. The social engagement system, the ventral vagal state with its warm, regulated, connected quality, is activated not just by safety in the environment but by the prosody of voice. The rhythm and musicality of a slow, warm, calm voice directly activates the ventral vagal complex in the listener. This is why music, lullabies, certain kinds of speech, and even the sound of slow, rhythmic, gentle narration like this can have a calming effect on the nervous system. The frequencies and rhythms of voice are safety cues that the nervous system is hardwired to respond to. Warmth, literal physical warmth, activates the parasympathetic system. The warmth of a blanket, of a warm bath or shower, of warm food or drink, speaks directly to ancient physiological comfort systems. The gentle pressure of weight against the body, weighted blankets, the warmth of another person nearby, even simply placing one hand over the heart and feeling its beat, activates the same systems. Movement, particularly rhythmic bilateral movement, walking, swimming, gentle rocking, helps discharge the mobilized energy of incomplete stress response cycles. When the sympathetic system activates and prepares the body for action, but no action occurs, the mobilized energy remains in the body. Gentle rhythmic movement provides an outlet for that energy, helping the body complete the activation cycle and return to its resting state. Research on trauma recovery consistently finds that body-based movement practices produce measurable improvements in nervous system regulation, and this is one of the primary mechanisms. And then there is the simple, patient practice of what Deb Dana calls glimmer seeking, the active, intentional noticing of small cues of safety and goodness in the present environment. A glimmer is the opposite of a trigger. Where a trigger is a cue that the neuroceptive system uses to activate a defensive response, a glimmer is a cue that activates the ventral vagal social engagement system, a brief signal of safety, warmth, connection, beauty, the warmth of sunlight on your face, the sound of someone you love breathing quietly nearby, a smell that means home, the softness of the pillow against your cheek. We are not designed to consciously notice most of these cues. The attention tends to be more strongly pulled toward potential threats than toward safety signals. This is the negativity bias again, doing its job. Deliberately redirecting attention toward the glimmers is a way of providing the nervous system with data it might otherwise overlook. Research on gratitude and positive effect shows that deliberately directing attention toward what is good in the present moment produces measurable changes in physiology, reductions in cortisol, improvements in heart rate variability, shifts in the balance of activation between the sympathetic and parasympathetic branches. The attention itself is a regulating act. Where the attention goes, the nervous system follows. None of these practices require perfection. None of them work through force or effort or the determination to be different than you are. They work through the patient accumulation of experience, through giving the nervous system new data, new moments, new embodied events to incorporate into its continuous moment-by-moment model of whether the world is safe. The nervous system changes slowly, but it changes. And every slow breath, every moment of noticing that right now is okay, every small return to the body and to the warmth of the present, each of these is quietly, biologically doing something real. Each one is a small new piece of evidence. Each one is the nervous system beginning, incrementally, to update its predictions about what the world offers. One final thought before we reach the closing. Be patient with yourself in this. The nervous system did not arrive at its current calibration overnight. It arrived there through the accumulated experience of a lifetime, through hundreds of thousands of moments of learning what the world is like and what it requires. The recalibration will not happen in a night either. It will happen across many nights, many quiet mornings, many small moments of choosing gentleness over urgency, presence over vigilance, breath over tension. what researchers who study the neuroscience of change, including work on neuroplasticity and on the recovery from trauma-related nervous system dysregulation, consistently emphasize is that the direction of change matters more than the pace. Small, consistent movement toward regulation is neurobiologically real and meaningful. Each time you slow your breath and feel the body begin to respond. Each time you notice the safety of the immediate moment and let that noticing actually land rather than rushing past it. Each time you treat the nervous system's vigilance with compassion rather than frustration. Each one of these small moments is moving the needle. Not dramatically, not immediately, but genuinely, cumulatively, in ways that, over months and years, produce lives that feel more livable, more open, more available for what is good. This is what the science says. And tonight, in this quiet, you are already doing it. We have traveled a long way together tonight. From the amygdala's ancient alarm, firing in fractions of a second before conscious thought even has time to form, to the extraordinary subconscious intelligence of neuroception, reading your environment right now for cues of safety or danger without any awareness from you. From the three states of the nervous system, the ventral vagal warmth of genuine connection and genuine rest, the sympathetic mobilization of fight or flight readiness, the ancient dorsal vagal quiet of protective shutdown, to the ways that the history written in a nervous system can narrow the window of tolerance, make calm feel unfamiliar, and keep the body on a low, persistent alert even in moments of genuine peace. We've talked about allostatic load and what happens to the hippocampus and the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex under sustained stress. The alarm getting more sensitive, the brakes getting weaker, the thinking brain's ability to reassure the ancient brain gradually diminishing. We've talked about how the past is not merely remembered but genuinely stored in the body, in the calibration of stress hormones, in the patterns of neural connectivity, in the way the nervous system has learned to predict the world based on what the world has done. And we've talked about why none of this makes you broken. Why every alarm and every vigilance and every night of quiet wakefulness in a room that is safe is the nervous system working faithfully with everything it has been given. The nervous system is not your enemy. It is your oldest companion doing the work it evolved to do with a dedication that is, when you really see it, something to be moved by. And then we found our way toward what comes next, the breath and the vagus nerve, and the extraordinary physiological cascade of slowing down the exhalation. The warmth, the rhythm, the patient practice of noticing the small glimmers of safety in the present moment. The gentle, gradual building of a new history. A history of returning to calm, of finding the body safe to inhabit, of the night being a place where rest is possible. You are, right now, listening to a voice. And that voice, the science of the social engagement system tells us, is carrying information that your nervous system is already processing. The rhythm, the pace, the warmth embedded in the sound. These are cues of safety. And your heart, right now, is responding to them, moment by moment, quietly, without your having to do anything at all. The oldest parts of your nervous system are receiving these signals. The ventral vagal system is being gently invited, through sound, to settle. You are somewhere soft tonight. The day has ended, with everything the day held, whatever work, whatever worry, whatever love, whatever weight. All of it is on the other side of now. And now is this darkness and quiet and breath, and the knowledge that you are here, and that the most ancient and faithful part of you has been watching over you all this time. Before we reach the final quiet, let me offer something to take with you, not as a task, not as a new thing to manage, but simply as a thought you can carry lightly, to return to whenever it feels useful. The feeling of being unsafe when nothing is wrong is not a sign that you are in danger. It is a sign that your nervous system has a history, that it has learned things from the world it has lived in, that it has adapted, as nervous systems do, to protect you from what it has experienced and what it has learned to expect. The neuroscience is unambiguous on this. Every person who has ever experienced a prolonged period of stress, uncertainty, adversity, or unpredictability carries some version of that recalibration in their nervous system. It is not rare. It is, in the contemporary world, extraordinarily common. Rates of anxiety disorders in the general population have been increasing steadily in the years leading up to and through the mid-2020s, with large epidemiological surveys finding that a substantial portion of the population, in some studies approaching 1 in 3 adults, meets the clinical criteria for an anxiety disorder at some point in their lives. When you account for the broader category of elevated physiological vigilance that falls short of clinical diagnosis but still significantly affects quality of life, the numbers are much higher still. You are not alone in this. You are, in fact, in very large and very good company. And the science is equally unambiguous that this is changeable. The brain's neuroplasticity does not stop in childhood. The capacity for the nervous system to learn new patterns, to incorporate new experiences of safety, to gradually revise its predictions about the world, this capacity persists across the entire lifespan. There is no age at which the window closes, no point at which the system becomes fixed and unable to shift. Human beings have been found to show meaningful changes in nervous system function, measurable in brain imaging, in heart rate variability, in HPA axis regulation, in response to therapeutic practices even in late adulthood. The body that learned vigilance can learn something new, not by forgetting what it learned before, but by adding new layers, new chapters, new accumulated evidence of a world that sometimes offers rest. The poet Rainer Maria Rilke once wrote, and I paraphrase because we don't reproduce quoted material here, he wrote about the importance of living in the questions themselves, of inhabiting uncertainty with patience rather than forcing premature answers. The nervous system's journey toward safety is like this. It is a process of living with the question, of returning again and again to the present moment and asking, can I find some safety here, right now, even if I cannot be certain of tomorrow? Can my body believe this particular moment, even if it is not yet ready to believe all moments? Usually the answer in any given moment is yes. Right now, as you listen, the immediate environment is almost certainly genuinely safe. The immediate moment, this particular intake of air, this particular beat of the heart is okay. The nervous system may not be ready to generalize that safety outward to tomorrow or to next week or to all the uncertain future. But this moment, this is available. And this moment, received with gentleness and without demand for more, is sufficient. It is one more data point, one more small experience of safety for the system to add to its record. This is the work of a lifetime, done one moment at a time. There is no destination to reach. There is only the ongoing practice of returning to the breath, to the body, to the warmth and weight of the present, to the small and genuine safety of right now. And as you do, as you practice this returning, across many nights and many small quiet moments, you may find slowly, without fanfare, that the hum grows a little quieter, that the body holds itself a little more loosely, that the nights are a little more their own, dark and still and available for rest, that the silence, which once felt watchful, begins to feel more and more like something closer to home. There is nothing you need to figure out tonight. There is nothing you need to prepare for or rehearse or resolve. The mind that wants to review and anticipate and arrange, that mind is doing its job, and you can be gentle with it. You can say to it, I know you're trying to keep things together. I know you're looking out for us. You can rest now. We're safe. And if the body doesn't quite believe that yet, if there is still that familiar hum beneath the quiet, that watchfulness that has been your companion for so long it has started to feel like part of you, that is okay. That is enough. The nervous system doesn't change in a night. It changes across many nights, through many small accumulated moments of finding safety real and finding rest possible. Tonight is one of those nights. This moment is one of those moments. The breath you are breathing right now, this slow, soft breath, the exhalation a little longer than the inhalation, the vagus nerve responding, the heart rate gently settling. This breath is one of those moments. You don't have to force anything. You don't have to be different than you are. You only need to be here, in this one breath, in this one quiet, in this single small and sufficient moment of rest. That is enough. That is always enough. And over time, across weeks and months of these small, gentle moments, a nervous system that has accumulated enough of them begins to recognize something, begins to call this feeling familiar, begins quietly and without announcement to call it home. So let your breath be slow. Let your body be heavy and warm against whatever holds you. Let the thoughts that arrive pass through without requiring your engagement, like weather moving through, like clouds crossing a night sky, present and then gone and then replaced by the next one. There is nothing that requires your attention tonight, nothing that cannot wait until morning. The world will be there when the light returns. Right now, in this soft and velvet hour, there is only this, the cool, still air, the quiet of the room, the gentle rhythm of your breath, the steady, faithful beating of your heart, the particular and perfect darkness of this moment. And beyond the walls, the night continuing its slow movement through the sky, enormous and unhurried, the stars doing their ancient work, the earth turning as it has always turned, holding everything, holding you. You are safe enough right now. That is enough. Rest. If this conversation tonight felt like something you needed, if you found yourself in what we were exploring, in the quiet alarm without a name, in the body that stays watchful in the stillness, I would genuinely love to hear about it in the comments. Your experience is part of this, and it matters. And if you want more of these long, slow, science-filled nights, the kind where we take our time, where we don't rush toward any conclusion, where we simply follow the question wherever it needs to go and trust that understanding itself is a form of rest, then please subscribe to Deep Science Sleep. Every video on this channel is made for exactly this moment. The end of the day, the question that surfaces in the dark, the mind that wants to understand before it can let itself rest. If you have someone in your life who carries this, the quiet vigilance, the body that can't quite believe in the safety available to it, the restlessness that has no clear reason, please send this to them. Sometimes the most useful gift you can offer is simply the words, "There is a reason for this. Your body is not doing anything wrong. You are not broken. You are a person whose nervous system has learned from everything that has ever happened to you. and the same capacity that taught it vigilance can teach it something else. Slowly, gently, one quiet breath at a time. Sleep well,